Welcome to Immigration Invasion, a podcast where we explore the ridiculous and absurd aspects of immigration law in the U.S. We're your hosts, Asma Din
and Robert Armstrong.
We are very excited. This is our first episode with a guest.
Yes.
And so let's talk about what this episode is called and what it's about.
So for those of you guys that have not been paying attention to the news, that's okay. You tune in here for your I guess, monthly news update. We have a new president-elect, new old president-elect, one Donald Trump. That is very different from the trajectory that we expected to at our last podcast. So the plan that we had set forth for this podcast, we threw it away. And this podcast is called Now What? Now What? Right? Yeah. And I think we wanted to take a different approach at analyzing what's possibly going to happen now that we have a new old president again. For the first time, the second time. I couldn't think of a better person to have on than Paul Hunker, who is a partner for DMCA immigration law firm and also an adjunct professor at SMU and one of my friends. So Paul has shown himself to be level-headed in analyzing these issues, but also he's kind of our inside source. He used to work for the DHS as the ICE OPLA chief counsel, right? Is that right, Paul?
That's exactly right.
Okay, I usually do forget all of those acronyms and titles.
Lots of government titles.
Yes, absolutely. So that's what we're going to do with this episode. And you know, if you're looking for a rage cast to listen to, this isn't it. We're really doing our best not to take it in that direction. But we are going to be some smart asses about some of this stuff. So if that's not your flavor, this might not be. Yeah. It's not going to be your cup of tea because we got to laugh. We have to laugh.
Absolutely.
It's going to get crazy.
Absolutely. And we're going to try our best not to make this a total downer episode either. We want to go over some of the possibly positives, some things that we as practitioners should maybe be doing the next several months. And so we don't want this to be a total downer episode. Right. So we will try our best to not make it a total, depressing spiral.
Look, we're smiling. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's get into it. Let's do our broken news segment. And so obviously broken news, Trump wins.
Yes.
Yet again. And so what was everybody's initial thoughts, reactions?
Here we go again for the first time. Again. That was it. That was, I will say, the first time around, I was gutted, right? Like I just didn't see it coming, had no idea that it was possible to happen, in the United States of America, given the dialogue that was, led up to it. The second time, not so much, right? The second time was more like okay, we're going to do this again. So, not a pleasant feeling. However, I do, after a few days, I was able to kind of separate myself and then start thinking a little bit more logically. And the reality is we've been through this at least once. I think at least for the next 4 years, I want to focus on the micro instead of the macro. Like what can I do on the local level? What's in my sphere of influence? So there was that, and a lot of video game playing. A lot. Retro gaming.
Right. Yeah. Paul, what was your initial reaction? I guess this is your first one as a removal defense or immigration our side practitioner. Yes. So what was your reaction?
Well, I was not surprised. I figured it was going to happen as we spoke about based on the politics. And when I went into private practice, my dad was a litigator, and he had this little bobblehead doll, and it's this like English barrister, and it said "Sue the bastards." So I think we have an opportunity to successfully be involved in litigation to push back on excesses that we may see in the Trump administration, and I'm excited to be able to do that.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we're excited to have you on our side for this. I think that you will provide like a wealth of knowledge and just a lot of things that we don't know about because, a lot of us have never worked for DHS before.
Right.
So I think that your background, you know a lot of the inner workings. And so that's why we were really excited about having you on this episode as well. So,
and I'll be honest, I was excited when you first when we first talked and I found out that you were going to come on our side.
I think you knew before a lot of people.
I did, but I attorney privilege.
Yes.
But I was excited for your capacity to be a disruptor, right? Mm-hmm. And we're talking about in ethical ways, nothing weird. It's not going to, sneak us any secret, sauce recipes for eyes, unless you want to. We'll take them, but probably won't. But having that insight is going to be very helpful to those of us on the other side, because last time around a firewall went up and we didn't have any information. And for people that were new practitioners, they just didn't have any way of finding things out about how ICE does things. So to that end, having you on today on this podcast is going to be helpful because we're going to talk about the now what of, Trumpocalypse do.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's trademarked.
And I think the OPLA people that we deal with in Dallas are very good people, and obviously the enforcement perspectives will change, and the way PD is exercised will change, but PD will still be exercised, and there's still very good people that we're dealing with in OPLA, throughout OPLA nationwide. And when I say sue the bastards, of course, I'm not being critical of any individual person. But
you don't have specific bastards in mind.
The bastard in the generic sense. Since I hear we can use strong words.
The royal.
You told me I can use strong words.
I did. So green light.
That's one of my stronger words. So I'm looking forward to sort of, with my experience and knowledge, sort of defending non-citizens when there will be excesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Asma, how did you take it?
So, I think I was the same as you, Robert. The first time it happened, I was just totally gutted. Like, I was not able to function. And there was a lot of fear of, like, what's going to happen to, like, I practice exclusively immigration law. Am I going to have to shut down my business in these next 4 years? And no, I didn't. And, it was total opposite. My workload increased significantly. And so I don't have that same mental stress of that going into it. I know that we will all be plenty busy with work. But I think definitely I'm just trying to throw these next several months into planning, filing whatever motions I can now for PD, whether that's directly with an IJ or, trying to negotiate with OPLA cases. I think that's how I've been basically trying to cope with what's happening now is just, trying to focus on what I can do now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Just a general question. Percentage-wise, what percentage of your clients want their applications filed before January? So me, it's like 100, like 99.976, right? But it's 100.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's 100 of mine as well. I have some very kind of discretionary motions to reopen out there. And those clients, some of them are very wise, and they tell me, I hope that, especially if they're with the BIA, sua sponte type motions, they're like, I hope that my motion just kind of stays pending for a while. And so I do have some clients too that kind of have that sense of like, okay, I don't think anything good is going to come for me out of the next 4 years. Let's not try to push things and just have it stay pending.
Yeah.
So
I think throughout the podcast, we're going to touch on the topic of timing quite a bit, because that's going to play into what this next 4 years looks like for us as practitioners.
The timing over the next, I guess, a little bit less than 2 months is going to be really important, because we're currently under the Biden enforcement priorities and the Doyle memo. And so we want to get those cases dismissed and admin closed, that we can get dismissed and admin closed under the standards. It's challenging for OPLA. I know it's the case in Dallas. I think it's the case everywhere that OPLA is sort of overwhelmed with the PD request. I think a couple weeks ago, there were 15 IJs in Dallas that OPLA Dallas had to cover. And one of the attorney who mans or staffs the PD inbox has to court.
You said attorney. You meant attorneys.
Yes.
The attorneys that man it. Because I imagine you guys must have an army of people monitoring the PD, not you guys.
Deeply sarcasm. I think that's deeply sarcasm here.
Deep sarcasm.
So
it's one person.
We started off with maybe 4 people on the PD team, and it was very, a lot of people who could look at those. But court got busier and busier with the surge on the border, and we had to keep reducing. So I'm happy that we have one attorney. I still say we.
Yeah.
It's hard to break the habit of when talking about the government.
It's a weird line, especially when you talk about the PD inbox, because it's something that's shared, right? Yeah. And I will often say we, referring to the region, but sometimes you'll say we because you were there when this when this policy started.
We created the PD inbox. I created the PD memo for Dallas. So I know how the process works. And so there's one attorney who's manning it right now, and she's often one attorney who's overseeing it, and she's often having to be in court. I'm hoping OPLA Dallas, there'll be some slowdown with the judges being on leave and things like that. So I'm hoping they're going to sort of try to get some of those, get some of those cleaned out and resolved before, was it January 20th? Before that date, when I assume that on day 1, the Doyle memo will be canceled.
Well, I, for one, am ready to do my civic duty. OPLA Dallas, if you guys need a volunteer to help work through some of those PD requests in alphabetical order, of course, Robert Armstrong, I am available.
We could name you, but we have SOUS's Special Assistant United States Attorney. You can be a South Special Assistant Chief Counsel.
Look at that.
Wow.
Do you get like a little sticker, a star sticker on your shirt, like a little deputy? Look at a little deputy PD inbox banner. Yeah. So that's, just one example of the huge backlog, huge amount of cases pending, not just before immigration court, not just on the enforcement, not just for benefits, but also for prosecutorial discretion processing at OPLA. So, well, before we get too technical, I mean, because I think that a lot of the what we're going to talk about later is going to address this.
Yeah.
Do we want to close out our broken news with something that's maybe not directly touching immigration, but it touches media and news, and obviously the sentiment for immigration is heavily driven by the conversation tone that you see the media have. So
absolutely,
there's a piece of news that we think is incredibly important to address in these times.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. For those of you who are aware, InfoWars, formerly owned by Alex Jones, and so The Onion bought the InfoWars at a liquidation sale, and InfoWars had to be liquidated because of Alex Jones's awful comments about Sandy Hook victims, and so he got sued into oblivion. And and so that's I guess a bit of positive news, right?
I gotta tell you, I literally laughed. Literally laughed. I just did. It's too funny, and this is one of those stories where, because of where we're at, kind of society as a society. Real news and parody is overlap so much, it's hard to tell what's what. So when this news ran, I thought it was an Onion story that somehow CNN was running. I'm like, okay, why is CNN running one of the Onion stories? And like, no. This is an Onion story that's true. It was great. It was
great. It was great. It was nice to get that because we were just hit with so much kind of bad stuff at once. So it was nice having that happen. And I was the same as you. When I first heard it, I was like, wait, this is an Onion story, right? Like this is this is satire. But no, it was real.
Yeah.
And
I really needed it. I mean, it brightened my day, and the way the Onion handled it was I mean, obviously it's the Onion, but they also put out a press release and made it known their motivation for it. There's a quote here in their press release that I wanted to. Oh, here we go. InfoWars has shown an unswerving commitment to manufacturing anger and radicalizing the most vulnerable members of society, values that resonate deeply with all of us at Global Tetrahedron. I'm like, this is just the best, They did let us know though that the sale of vitamins and supplements would stop immediately though. So those that were buying those things through InfoWars. So if you get your nutritional supplements through the Onion, InfoWars vitamins will not be available. So.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, time to get your vitamins on Amazon, GNC.
Whatever other podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of which, yes.
Maybe we'll start selling vitamins. Boom.
Immigration, invasion, children's vitamins, which the most important thing is that it strengthens your bones so that you can climb and run.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it.
Love it. Okay. Okay, so Paul, as our guest, you have the honor of doing our hit or kit segment.
Yes.
And so it was funny before we were asking Paul if in his household if he had the Danish cookie box, and when he opened it, if it was sewing supplies. And sadly, Paul, you didn't grow up with that experience.
Sadly, I grew up with opening the tin and having cookies like Grandma would give me.
But I mean, every time you open it, it was cookies.
I can't remember it ever not being cookies.
That is, and we can barely remember it ever being cookies. For some reason that packaging, just resonated with. And this is the weird part, like brown immigrants, regardless of continent of origin or language, religion, for some reason, it just clicked. I think it's probably gotta be top 10 things that Western society exported to, European society exported to brown countries. It has to be in there. Yeah. I don't know the numbers. I'm not a history major, but look it up. Someone that is, please put it in the comments. But yeah, it really is ubiquitous. And Paul, I think at first Paul thought maybe I was messing with him. I'm like, hey, the cookie tin. He's like, cookies. Yeah. So. But as we said, Paul, earlier before the show, and for those of you that are new to the podcast, and that's funny because this is just our second episode.
Yes.
Everybody's new. We're new to the podcast.
We're new to the podcast.
Yeah. You are, as a child, an immigrant child, accustomed to seeing these tins, and you never know if it's good or bad. You never know. Is it cookies? Is it not cookies until you grab it, shake it, and open it, right?
Can I show the tin just so people can see it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Show the tin.
Here it is.
That is the royal.
You can hear cookies. I don't think there's cookies in here.
Yeah. That's you're spoiling it, Paul, but yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
So, and what we do is, we will take a piece of news, something that's happened recently, and then we'll kind of give it a thumbs up, thumbs down. And our way of giving it thumbs up is to say, hey, there's cookies here, right? That's a good policy. This is something that's positive for people. Though we give it a thumbs down as we say, hey, no, these are sewing. This is sewing kit, sewing supply. So it's hit or kit. So Paul, you are being that you are our inaugural guest, the first ever invader
Yes,
on the
our
immigration
first invader.
Yes. You have the honor of being the first invader to do the cookie. And so the news, right, that we're going to address, well, it's Trump wins again, right? So is that a hit or is it sewing kit? Let's see. Go ahead and grab that tin.
Okay.
Let's see.
I need to open it up.
Yeah. Open it up. Open it up.
Yeah. Okay, I'm expecting cookies.
No.
Sewing kit.
Sewing kit. Okay. All right. So, and I think that lines up with how most people feel, right? Most immigrant, advocates feel.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's that simple, right? Like that initial, gut reaction is like, this is the worst, right? But now we have hindsight. This is the second time.
Yeah.
This is the sequel.
Yeah.
Right? Trumpocalypse.
The Empire Strikes Back.
Part 2, right?
Yeah.
Hot Shots Part 2. And we've got something to contextualize this with. And I think that's very important this time around. It'll allow us to hit the ground more effectively and be able to move more effectively come January. So, I think that's how we dig into this, right? So, the first thing that we wanted to do was to kind of take apart. I think the first thing we do is we look at what happened last time.
Yeah.
Right? We look back and say, what did the last Trump administration try, right, to do, fail to do, and what did they actually accomplish? Because the knee-jerk response is to take him at his word, and if everything he says gets done, the United States population is going to drop drastically in the next 4 years, right? So that on its face can't be a good place for us to orient ourselves. So looking back, what happened, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about some of this. Paul, I think you can kind of tell us a little bit about what you saw happening kind of on the enforcement based side, whether it was with OPLA or just enforcement at the border. What did you kind of see that happened last time with the first administration that maybe you expect to see the second time around?
Well, the travel ban was very early on. That was shock and awe, and that morphed into a travel ban that survived constitutional review. We'll see. I don't know if there'll be more country-specific travel bans. That will be implemented. Prosecutorial discretion changed a lot. So we had a similar kind of model under the Biden administration of what cases we went after and what cases we did not. And so I expect the government will still exercise prosecutorial discretion, so we can still ask that a case be dismissed, and it'll just be case by case, and there'll be decisions that will be made on that. We'll see what happens with admin closure. Admin closure is one of those things that sort of is, depending on the Attorney General, it's been something that's been broadly used or very narrowly used. So we'll see how that goes. We saw a lot of it getting tougher to meet the requirements for legal immigration. And I have less experience with that. You all have more experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely saw, I remember in the first Trump administration, we saw just like crazy things like them rejecting applications that were filed because instead of, sometimes, for instance, they ask for a client's middle name, right, on an application. Maybe client doesn't have middle name, so we just we've always traditionally left that box blank, but then they enforced a NA policy where any box that was blank that did not have NA would just simply get rejected. And so that was particularly very harsh in cases where there's like a timing issue or a timing deadline. I know that for instance, U visa cases, you only have so long to file after you get the certification from the police department. So That is definitely something that I think is going to make legal immigration harder. Interviews all across the board for cases, for everything.
I think. Yeah, I think. That was one of the things that really gummed up the works last time around. Is you have cases that can be fully adjudicated based on the evidence that you submit. Right. For instance, a petition of a parent of a USC. You're just proving, hey, is this a parent? Yes or no? Do you have enough evidence to prove it? So the interviews were pretty ridiculous. You'd go in and you'd waste a ton of time, and the officer would be wasting their time to confirm, like, is this your kid? Yeah. Is this your parent? Yeah. You still live at blah, blah, blah. And like, that's extremely inefficient, but I think it was done on purpose, and I think stuff like that's coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. I also foresee the return of our favorite I-944 form, which Paul will now have the pleasure of doing now that
can't wait.
He's a private practitioner. But yeah, that was just really going after people on the public charge ground, specifically of inadmissibility, just trying to really, it's sad, penalize people who are lower income, and trying to prevent them from adjusting their status. And so I do think that may be something that we see coming back as well. Now, Paul, something that I did want to ask you was about the Remain in Mexico policy. Is that something that you foresee returning?
Trump has said that he wants to do that. Now, Mexico will have to cooperate with that. We can't return Guatemalans to Mexico unless Mexico agrees to that. So we'll see what sort of deal that the Trump administration can make with the Mexican government.
Because they're already signaling. The president of Mexico has already signaled that she wants the U.S. to remove people back to their country of origin. So...
Okay. Yeah. So that will be interesting because the first go around she wasn't the current Mexican president wasn't in power. I forget who it was the first go around, but
AMLO, his acronym.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see with this president, kind of this current Mexican president, how she reacts to a lot of this. So, that's definitely going to determine the border side agenda, I think. But I think it seems like most of what's going to be done and what was done in the past was performative, right? That's where the focus is. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a focus on removing people with criminal history. It's not necessarily deterring people that are approaching the border to enter unlawfully. It's more about what can we do that puts on the biggest show, because there's a lot of boring stuff that can be done behind the scenes that is more effective than any of the big show stuff, right? For me, I think USCIS, all their forms getting longer, just ridiculously longer, and with extreme vetting, that had a huge impact on slowing things down, both from USCIS's perspective and our perspective. But that's not performative, so that goes under the radar. There's not a lot of focus, but that invisible wall, as people were calling it, the increased bureaucratic burden to get things, prepared and sent through the system. Really, I just don't see how that doesn't come back.
Yeah. I think we should appreciate when he does those performative shock and awe sort of things. Often those are the clients who may be able to help a lot. For example, with the travel ban, the first travel ban was total shock and awe. It was like all visas are canceled as of now. So people had spent years getting their immigrant visas. They're on the plane, blissfully ignorant, with their legitimate immigrant visa packet, not knowing that those were canceled by operation of law. And so that was very unpleasant for them. They were detained at the airport for a few days, but there was a TRO that was filed, and those people were quietly paroled outside of the country. So I think in those initial shock and awe cases, we have to be particularly vigilant and also optimistic that, there's probably a way we can help our clients.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, so let's get into kind of what we think might be different this time around. What, something that I keep hearing about is them getting rid of TPS, particularly for, I keep hearing about it for Haitians and Venezuelans. And I think Ukraine is also a TPS designated country. Is that right? So potentially Ukrainians as well. So Paul, can you tell us a little bit about what it would look like to get rid of TPS? Like, is that something that he can do via executive order? Would it require something more than that?
The secretary would have to undesignate the countries.
Okay.
And he tried to do that first time around, and the court enjoined the eliminating it for El Salvador. So I assume there'll be litigation when he tries to undesignate countries.
Okay, so it won't be an immediate, it's not something that he can do immediately right away. So I guess that is something that we can encourage a lot of practitioners who listen in on this to continue filing those TPS applications.
Yeah. And just generally, right? Any benefit that is available now, the day that he walks into office, don't automatically stop filing for those benefits for two reasons. Number one, he may not successfully be able to stop whatever benefit or get rid of whatever benefit. But number two, you don't know if that application is going to be pending for 4 years. Is that application going to be adjudicated under the next administration? Who knows? But until further notice, you keep filing, keep submitting applications, keep requesting these benefits.
I think that's true. But, pending, they may treat pending applications differently, even if TPS is undesignated at a certain country at a certain point. It's hard to say.
Yeah, absolutely. What about something like United for Ukraine? That's also another program that's allowing Ukrainians to flee. What about do we foresee him getting rid of United for Ukraine? And if so, how would he do so?
So that's a parole program, and there's a lot of parole programs that are going to end. The parole program for CBP-1 is a parole program.
Yep.
The parole for the Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, Cubans, I think that's going to end. Maybe they'll attempt to sort of say that your parole is ended for the people that already have parole. The issuance of a notice to appear will do that. But as Robert, as you were saying, there's just so much to do and there's limited resources. So the administration won't have the resources to do everything that he wants to do because it takes time to issue an NTA and time to cancel parole.
Right.
Yeah. And so, Paul, I guess that's another good point. We keep hearing, we want to deport. I think the figure that keeps being thrown out by the Trump administration is 1 million people a year. Right. First of all, it would be extremely costly. But Paul, I think you can kind of speak to whether or not that's even doable with kind of the resources that we currently have. What would that look? What did that look like on the other side, right?
So most of the deportation officers in Dallas are working, for example, with our detention centers, or they're monitoring non-detained cases. We only have a small number of what we call fugitive operations officers, or as the government likes to call them, FUG ops.
Stop.
No, it's serious. FUG ops.
Okay, they've got someone is making up these names, and they're literally doing it to see how far they can go. Because even ICE attorneys used to be called, TAs, and now they're OOPLA. Right, which sounds kind of like Oompa Loompas, but just Oopla, and now you have FUG ops. Okay.
It honestly, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like something from the Mean Girls movie that they would make up as like, oh yeah, we're going to start using FUG ops as like a thing. Right?
Yeah, like I immediately think of Fugly, right? Like Fugly ops. So yeah, they're trolling us.
Yeah,
they've gotta be trolling us.
So there's only a handful of FUG op officers that are out there. And I went out. I remember I was with Tracy Short, who was then the principal legal advisor, and we accompanied the ICE officers one morning. And it was like 4 or 5 officers. 'Cause you need a number of officers for officer safety and things like that. Maybe they had like 3 targets, and none of them they arrested no one. They weren't home. So it's very time intensive and very officer intensive. I expect they'll do some, again, like you said, performative shock and awe to scare people, to make them think that they're likely to be arrested. But I think it's more likely you'll be struck by lightning 3 times than someone's going to knock on your door, even with a removal order, especially if you don't have any criminal history. I think they'll do a little bit of it, but I think it's very unlikely. What we know and what we advise our clients is, stay out of county jail, right?
Yeah.
Pay your tickets, take care of those things, because I think what's going to be different under Trump is anyone they apprehend who's in custody now, like in Dallas, is going to be taken into ICE custody.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of those people will if they're smart, if they're knowledgeable, they'll get attorneys and they'll be released on bond. That's what we saw under the Trump administration. So in a sense, they're back to where they were, non-detained docket that may take a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Paul, do you know what the numbers look like under the first Trump administration? Like, what were the, and you can just kind of speak generally, but do you know like how many people they were actually able to remove in a given year during the first Trump administration?
I don't know the actual numbers, Asma, but it was like on the order of maybe a couple of 10, 20, 30,000 more. And we're talking about those sorts of numbers.
Okay.
Not millions.
Not millions. Okay.
Now, one thing I hear is Tom Homan was talking about utilizing National Guard and the military to sort of expand detention space so they have places to put people until they can remove them. And I assume this Department of State will be putting a lot of pressure on countries to accept their people. So we have to be ready and geared up for motions to rescind practice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because we can stop, if we can articulate a good faith basis that the person did not receive notice, then we can invoke the automatic stay of removal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So
I think space is going to be a big thing, right? From the conversations that I've heard recently with ICE, is that there's just not enough space for the people they have now, right? So where are they going to get the space? I mean, there's a lot of concepts of plans of where they're going to get them. Obviously, something that was in the news, the state of Texas very graciously has offered on a platter big chunk of land down near the border for detention space. And I think that there have been some moves that make it more possible for private detention facilities, even in states that don't want them. But that's all conjecture, and those things don't exist now. Yeah. So what can be done within 4 years? I don't know. I think some performative stuff's going to happen, but I don't think that 4 years is enough to build out that infrastructure so you can deport 1 million people per second. Oh, sorry, a year per year.
They definitely could. I bet they do better than they did under Trump 45 in terms of the numbers, but I think it still is going to be in the order of an additional 20, additional 30,000.
Yeah,
those sorts of numbers. I expect. The apprehensions on the border will continue to go down. They've gone down a lot under the Biden administration with his restrictions on asylum on the border. And although I expect courts to enjoin that pretty soon, I think maybe some of the courts were cutting Biden some slack in terms of basically allowing him to do what Trump was doing in terms of restricting the ability to get asylum on the border. But I think you'll see the judges probably striking down the asylum limitations, the third country rules. So that may make it harder. And then the Trump administration is going to have to think about remain in Mexico, but Mexico is going to have to cooperate with that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with what they call them, the intercontinentals, people from the Eastern Hemisphere, people from countries not in Central America, where it's harder to remove people? It's going to be a real challenge for the Trump administration.
Absolutely. And so and there was a lot of talk about this in the first Trump administration, and there was some success in them exercising expedited removal, Paul. Do you see them expanding expedited removal? What do you see going on with that?
They tried to expand expedited removal, and it was stopped.
Yeah.
And, you know, I assume that the really smart people at Office of Immigration and Litigation and DHS were saying, "Sir, don't do this. Expedited removal is this expedited procedure that constitutionally works because you're dealing with someone with no prior ties to the United States."
Yeah.
There's a long series of cases that sort of say that. The extent they try to use expedited removal for the Haitian who's been here almost 2 years, you know, that's the kind of case I'd like to bring, that habeas.
Yeah.
Because I think we can successfully argue that that does not give that person due process.
Make sure to send that referral your way, buddy.
Yes, absolutely.
Give me the Haitian who allegedly was eating his cat, and I'll defend him.
Yeah.
He wasn't eating his cat.
I heard they were eating cats. They were eating dogs. That's what I heard. I don't know. I heard it on InfoWars, though. So.
Right. And so, Paul, do you think that there's going to be certain regions of the world that are going to be targeted? We sort of saw this with the first Trump administration as far as Middle Easterners, people from Muslim countries. Do we sort of see that for Trump Part 2? And if so, what countries do we think might be more targeted than others?
That's a really good question. I don't know. Maybe countries like Venezuela, assuming that they continue to be very adverse to the United States, you could potentially see a travel ban there. But I'm not sure. It seems like they're really focused on the border and the great deportation force. Right?
Yeah.
So I think we talked about this a little bit. Trump seems to be very driven by what he perceives to be public sentiment. And so this time around, I think it's, I don't know how much of an impact the Muslim support, played, because he had an increase in support from the Muslim community.
In Michigan, for example.
Yeah, that is what helped pave the road for him to be elected. So, I mean, do you think that the Muslim ban would be rolled out in the same way? Or is he gonna? Yeah,
I doubt it. I don't think that's what his focus is on.
Yeah, and so I do think, and you touched on this, whether Venezuela pushes back and which countries push back, but overall, even outside of the immigration sphere, I think there's been a lot of focus, and there's a lot of threat of focusing on enemies of Trump, right? Countries and states that he might feel are adverse to him. I think it'll be interesting to see. Does he come up with a not just a Muslim ban, but anti-Trump country ban, or I don't know, anti-patriotic. I don't know. I'm sure they'll come up with some name that makes it sound super catchy. But
or maybe people who don't, like, a country doesn't cooperate with removals.
Yeah,
maybe he could institute a travel ban for that country.
Yeah. So, I mean, don't say that again, because I feel like that's such a good idea. Right. I hope they're not listening.
I know, right?
I doubt Tom Homan. Tom, if you're listening, just ignore that idea.
Yeah.
You know Tom Homan.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So.
I consider Tom a friend. I haven't spoken to him for a while, but he used to be the deputy special agent in charge in Dallas, and he's sort of he's been promoted, and I understand Tom's perspective. I mean, Tom has a heart, and I think often his perspective is he was a Border Patrol agent, and he saw the incredible harm that smuggling would cause people, the rapes, the kids dying and people dying in the back of a truck, and I think he really sort of focuses on that as to why he really wants to crack down. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, that's interesting to know, because again, one of the benefits of having Paul here, there's no other way we would know that, right? It's not like there's any communication. I mean, Mr. Homan, we officially invite you to be a guest
Please,
on
Tom,
the
come.
Immigration Invasion podcast.
You may come, Tom. Maybe.
Yeah. But given how things were last time around, there probably won't be a lot of communication. So it's good to hear that there are some people on the other end that whether or not you agree with how they're doing it, are just people, or are humans, are driven by some of the same things. So, That's good to know, Paul.
Absolutely. And the other thing that they keep talking about, Paul, is a denaturalization task force. I don't know if you kind of know the numbers of how many people usually in a year are subject to denaturalization, but what do you kind of see going forward with this denaturalization task force?
It would be a very resource intensive task force, because it would have to be criminal denats or civil denats in federal district courts, and that takes U.S. attorneys. That takes a lot of time. That takes like CIS attorneys, OPLA attorneys working on those matters. And so it seems like that is something they are going to pursue, and I think it's an exciting area for us to sort of help defend people.
Yeah.
And I mean, one thing I've noticed more in private practice is, often we have the burden, and it's a very high burden.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of work for us to meet the 20 things we have to show for an adjustment application. If we mess up on one of those, we lose. The government usually doesn't have the burden. The burden's on us. When the government does have the burden, they're often not used to having the burden.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they don't know how to meet their burden. So, like, notices to appear for lawful permanent residence or rescission or DNATs. Those are things where they have a high burden, and I think we can take advantage of that because they're not used to meeting that burden.
Absolutely, and that's a good point, and I think that, before when we started filming, we talked a lot about how we do want to focus on some things that are going to be positives, and I think that there'll be some, I feel like after the first Trump administration, we all became better litigators, and I really see that after the second go round.
Speak for yourself.
Right.
Don't accuse me of things.
Yeah.
I think by nature we had to be. And we had to think more strategically, where there were some things that just as a function of habit were pro forma done, whether it was pleadings or whatever. We did have to start thinking more strategically about every single move.
Absolutely.
So that's a benefit.
Yeah.
I think it's very satisfying that, agency and being able to accomplish things for our clients. I mean, it's going to be very hard and painful for our clients, but I think as attorneys, there's a lot of joy in sort of really helping people with hard cases.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. I mean, I know, Osman, you and I this is one of the things you and I have connected with kind of on a foundational level, is that, we can't do everything, right? But we're part of a small group of just a few people that can do something, right? And that has a direct impact. And that's valuable. That's something that is going to have to keep me going for the next few years, right? But that impact does matter. And sometimes just sitting with somebody and listening to their story, listening to their fears and walking them through with the limited information that we have makes a difference. But other times, we're able to really step in and make a big impact. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I hate to swing back, but this is just one last hard question, right? Unpleasant question, but I think this one's you'll probably help us shoot this down pretty quickly. The use of military assets to enforce immigration internally within the U.S. Is that something that's just snap the finger? And
that's one of the great things about our country, I think, is limited government and separation of powers and things like that. And so, you can't use the U.S. Army generally for civil law enforcement. I think the National Guard, there's more flexibility with the National Guard. It seems legal that they could use the National Guard or the military to maybe create additional detention space. Maybe we'll see how that goes.
What are some of the limitations of using the National Guard, say, to set up checkpoints on I-35?
Yeah, I don't think that's a good question. I mean, they certainly don't have immigration authority. Perhaps they could they could be accompanying Border Patrol agents and supporting Border Patrol and working with them. Generally, I think in law enforcement task forces, you could have, you often have an ICE officer, you have an FBI officer, you have a state officer. So whatever criminal matter or a civil matter that they violated, then there's someone who could, lay hands on them and assume custody. Now, I'm no expert on how the military can sort of be be put into that. I think it's an example where there'll be a lot of lawsuits, and probably the Trump administration will be exceeding its authority, and we'll have to stop it.
Yeah. Okay, but it's not as easy as it's being thrown around,
right?
In the saber rattling.
I don't think we'll see privates in the U.S. Army knocking on the door and taking people into custody.
Yeah, the knocking on the door. That's exactly what I was going for. So it's that's one of the big ones that it conjures up images that are absolutely terrifying, but the proximity of that danger being executed, being brought to fruition, I think is not as high.
And maybe it'll be helpful, given that we've had Trump 45, and we saw the Trump effect, which was simply because Trump was president, the numbers of apprehensions decreased. Remember, I was talking, Bishop Burns became the bishop right around that same time, and I met with this immigration task force, and some of the priests there were saying, like, mass attendance at some of the more Hispanic parishes was way down because people feared that they would be arrested driving to church. There's that one video of the ICE officers arresting someone in the car, and the kids crying, the kids filming it, and of course that puts the fear, and it puts so much fear into people. But we have to help people, be not afraid. Again, I think it's more likely you'll be struck by lightning 4 times than you would to be stopped by ICE.
That went up from 3.
Stop. Well, 3 was them knocking on your door.
Okay.
If you're not a criminal. 4, I think, would be ICE actually stopping you in a vehicle stop.
Okay,
it's going to happen.
Okay, so I think but a very important question. What about just once? Because once is too much for me. I don't want to get hit by lightning even once. Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've gone over time, and Paul, first of all, again, thank you for being
my pleasure.
Our inaugural guest. And it's been so helpful to hear your perspective in these interesting times that we live in. I know we're going to have challenges coming up for the next 4 years, but we're going to have great content.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll actually get some cookies one of these days.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'd love for that to be the problem. It's like,
maybe
hey,
when we have some successes, you should have cookies in there.
Oh no, we will. Absolutely will have cookies if and when there are big successes. So just holding my breath, but I've got cookies on order.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have them in my Amazon shopping cart. Yeah. So, any final thoughts, Asma or Paul?
Yeah. So I think we should focus a little bit on the positives here. So we were talking about all of us have clients, have cases that are currently people who are in removal proceedings, not particularly strong cases that we want to move forward, and so I think one positive is that a lot of there'll be more people placed in proceedings. It'll sort of delay things, clog things up, and so there will be some people who do benefit from the next 4 years.
Yeah. I agree, Asma. I think that as practitioners, we just need to pivot, right? That's what we'll have to do. And so the rush to get cases done, that era is done, right? And it needs to be a time of patience, letting the land lay fallow, which I think that I'm actually going to tell. When people are like, hey, I want my asylum hearing tomorrow, I'm going to say, no, you don't. Let the land lay fallow and see how that goes.
Yeah.
Definitely not an era where we should be rushing to try to get adjudication, but the machinery is not going to be able to sustain any kind of rush. So
absolutely.
For those cases where time is the best thing we can get for them, this is going to be a good thing, I think, for them. Right?
Yeah. Some of the cases where we want to move quickly are where we can get the case dismissed based on the new EOR regulations. And that's going to take time for the Trump administration to rescind that. So, where for example, we have a prima facie I-130, we can ourselves file for a motion to dismiss based on that. So
yeah, agreed. And this is going to force us to utilize different parts of our tools, our tool belt than what we used to in the past. So even though PD might not be something to go to, there's still other options on the table in immigration court. And I do trust that the pool of brilliant people that work in the immigration space that are zealous advocates and are constantly looking for innovative ways to help people that are our clients, they're going to come up with great ideas too. And I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and it's such a great collegial, one of the reasons I was really happy to go into private practice was the really collegial nature of immigration practice in Texas with the immigration law section with AILA, and hopefully I'll be in Guadalajara for the AILA Texas conference in the spring.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I think that will be a fun conference, and we're very happy, Paul, to have you on this side of the fence, and we're looking forward to seeing all the cool stuff you do in these next 4 years. So
yeah,
I think we can work together.
Yes,
that's I think where we are our best working together.
Positive deviance during these wild times. So, well, I mean, I think with that we close off the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And thank Paul again for being our guest.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank anybody that tuned in. We definitely appreciate your eyes and ears and tuning in. You can find our podcast, the Immigration Invasion Podcast. It's on Spotify. We're on YouTube, soon to be on Apple Podcasts as well. And little by little, we're going to be expanding where we push the podcast out to. But please reach out to us and give us comments. Let us know what you'd like to see on the podcast. But until then, we'll see you guys next time.
Yep. See you next time.
Bye-bye.